How's everybody doing? Happy Hanukkah. We also say a Freilich in Hanukkah. It's great to be learning with you on the first night of Hanukkah, when we are thankful for the miracles that the Holy One did for our ancestors in this time at this season. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Thursday, first night of Hanukkah? Oh, wait a minute. I need to do a little admin. Here we go. Let me get this together. Sorry, just had a little Wi-Fi gremlin right at the last minute, but thank God we do seem to be broadcasting okay. Very good. Yeah, we broadcasting? Hold on. Hold on. I think we are. Yes, we are. Okay. Who's in the house? Shandora in the Bronx, Lucy in Minnesota, Bella in Florida, Joseph in Lowell, Massachusetts, who just got back from his city's first public Hanukkah lighting in solidarity with the Jewish people. Thank God. We have so many good friends at this time when our enemies are just so emboldened and, coming out and saying things publicly that are just unbelievable. Those three, university presidents and their, shocking and disgusting testimony. It's unbelievable. We'll see how long they keep their jobs, shall we say. Sharon in New Jersey, Elvis saying Hag Sameach. What do you say? I celebrate not only for the defense of our own traditions, but also for freedom in general. Amen. Ryan in Jacksonville, Florida. Melissa in Great Neck. Paula in Chicago. David wishing everyone a happy Hanukkah. Leona in Southern Illinois. Sharon, please, Mishaberach for my brother-in-law, Ben Sion Moshe Ben Miriam, in the ER with sepsis and stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Please, God, may he have a refuah shlema. Please, God, a complete healing. This would be a great time for a miraculous recovery from stage 4 cancer. And we say amen. Guy in Dayton. Also, what's going on over there? Also, Marie in Freeport and Marjorie wishing everyone Hag Hanukkah Sameach with hope for a Hanukkah filled with spiritual light. Amen, Marjorie. Tonight's episode of AT Daily sponsored by Stephen Luftig in memory of Lillian Phillips and Sam Luftig. May the neshamas have a great aliyah. May their souls have a great elevation in the world of souls. We say amen. And Stephen, thank you so much for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. May you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we say amen. Okay, we are continuing our discussion of Mishna number 12 here in chapter 3 of Tractate Bava Kamma, the 21st volume of the Talmud. Tonight's daf is page 35 in this tractate. We read Mishna number 12 yesterday, basically states this interesting idea that there are some kinds of damages which the same damage was caused by an ox. The owner of the ox would be liable, but if that damage was caused by a person, that person would not be liable. And vice versa. There's certain kinds of damage which if it was caused directly by a person to another person, the person would be liable. But if the ox caused that same damage, the owner of the ox would be exempt, would not be liable. And then it explained a couple of cases. Now, one was this idea that, if my ox hurt my father, or if my ox started a fire on Shabbos, so I would be liable for the damage that fire caused or for the injury that the ox did to my father. But if I punched my father in the face and injured him, or if I kindled a fire on Shabbos, then I would be exempt from paying damages for those things because I would be liable to a much greater penalty, in fact, the death penalty, Obviously, if I was given warning immediately before I did the action, and then I did it anyway in the presence of witnesses of both the warning and the damage and the punch or the fire that I set, then I would become liable to the death penalty. And if somebody's liable to a death penalty and to pay damages, he's exempt from paying damages because of the death penalty. Okay. That was the Mishnah, number 12 here in chapter 3. We pick it up with the Gemara at the bottom of page 34b. Rabbi Abahu taught the following baraisa before Rabbi Yochanan. Anyone who performs labor destructively on Shabbos is exempt except one who injures another or kindles fire. Right? So the idea of the prohibited labors on Shabbos, the malachos, are the 39, not just types of labor, but categories of labor, which were involved in the construction of the tabernacle in the wilderness. So, for example, weaving was involved in the tapestries and the cloths that were used in the tabernacle. Carpentry was used, writing was done, cutting. But these kinds of labors were performed constructively, right? They had a constructive purpose, which was to build the tabernacle, right? So if you're doing something that is useful, that's a constructive labor. If you simply do something because you're a jerk and you like to break things and burn things, not to produce any benefit, not to produce any constructive benefit thereby, but just to destroy, so that actually doesn't violate Shabbos, right? If you're getting any benefit out of it, right? If you light a fire in order to have light, okay, so then you violated Shabbos. If you light a fire because you need the ashes for something, if you light a fire because you want to, clear out an old structure so that you can build a new structure in its place, those are all constructive labors. But if it's purely destructive, it's not actually a violation of Shabbos, right? So Rabbi Bahu taught this baraisa before Rabbi Yochanan that anyone who performs labor destructively on Shabbos is exempt, so that's the law. But then Rabbi Bahu brings these two exceptions, except for one who injures another or kindles a fire. So he's saying that even if it's for a destructive purpose, if you injure someone or kindle a fire on Shabbos, you are liable for violating Shabbos. Rabbi Yochanan said to Rabbi Abahu, go out and teach it outside. Meaning this baraisa is not fit for discussion in the study hall because, in other words, you got it wrong. You said something wrong, Rabbi Abahu. Now, the opinion that deems one liable for injuring another or killing or kindling a fire on Shabbos is not a Mishnah and should be ignored. That's what Rabbi Yochanan is saying. And if you say that it is a Mishnah, that one who injures another would be liable only in a case where he requires the blood to give to his dog. And one who kindles a fire would be liable only in a case where he requires its ashes. In these cases, the act is not purely destructive, but has some constructive purpose. Now, we learned in a Mishnah, in our Mishnah, the one we're studying now, Mishnah number 12 here in chapter 3. We learned in the Mishnah, if his ox set fire to a haystack on Shabbat, on Shabbos, he is liable. But if he himself set fire to a haystack on Shabbos, he is exempt from paying damages because he's liable to the death penalty for kindling this fire on Shabbos. Now, the Mishnah is presumably teaching a case where he set the fire in a scenario that is similar to the case where his ox did so. So just as in the case where his ox set the fire, it clearly does not need the ashes, right? The ox wasn't trying to perform some kind of constructive labor. The ox accidentally started a fire, right? Oxen don't typically start fires. They don't have the ability to, cognitively say, I want to start a fire. So presumably the ox accidentally set a fire by knocking over an oil lamp or something like that. So you're going to be liable for the destruction that ensues if your ox starts that fire, because, we don't ascribe intention, whether he did it purposely or not purposely. The ox started the fire, so its owner is liable. Whereas to be guilty to the death penalty, liable for the death penalty for kindling fire on Shabbos, you would have to have done that intentionally. If you did it unintentionally, then you would be liable to bring a sin offering because you violated Shabbos. But that's in the case of kindling a fire that has some kind of a purpose. So now that's what they're challenging. So in the Mishna is presumably teaching a case where he set the fire in a scenario that is similar to the case where his ox did so. Just as in the case where his ox set the fire, it clearly does not need the ashes, as an ox does not act with that kind of intention. So too, the case where he set the fire, where the person set the fire, it is presumably a case where he does not need the ashes. And nevertheless, the Mishnah teaches that he is exempt from paying damages because he is liable to the death penalty. So apparently, one who lights a fire on Shabbos is liable to the death penalty, even if he does not need the ashes, contrary to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. That's what the Gemara is suggesting. Now we're on page 35a, but now the Gemara immediately rejects this proof. No, the comparison is the other way around. The case where his ox set the fire is similar to the case where the person set the fire. And just as the case where he is liable for lighting a fire on Shabbos is one where he needs the ashes and he lit the fire on purpose to get those ashes, so too, the case of his ox setting fire to the haystack is one where the ox needs the ashes. What kind of an ox is this? That it figures out that if I set a fire, I'm going to get ashes. And then why does the ox need the ashes? And how does it figure out that it can get those ashes by setting a fire? What are we talking about here? And the Gemara asks, wait a minute. In the case where his ox set the fire, how can you find these circumstances where it did so because it needed the ashes? And Rav Avia said to him, well, here we are dealing with an intelligent ox that was bitten on its back, and it wants to burn down the haystack and then roll around in the ashes in order to heal the bite. And the Gemara asks, and from where do we know that this is the reason that the ox set the fire? And the Gemara answers, because after the ox burned the haystack, it was rolling around in the ashes. And the Gemara asks, and is there really a case like this? And the Gemara answers, yes! As a certain ox that was at the house of Rav Papa had a toothache, and it went inside and broke the lid of a utensil and drank the liquor that was inside and was cured. So evidently, there are oxen with this level of intelligence. So the sages said before Rav Papa, how can you say that the case involving his ox is similar to the case involving him? But doesn't the Mishnah teach, if his ox caused a person humiliation, he is exempt, the owner of the ox is exempt, right? Because oxen are not, if your ox humiliates another person, that's not the kind of damages that the owner of the ox is going to be liable for. If his ox caused a person humiliation, its owner is exempt. But if a person humiliated another person, he is liable. If the case of his ox is understood to be similar to the case involving him, how can you find a case where the ox intended to humiliate the person? One is liable for humiliating someone else only when he intends to do so. And an ox never has an intention to humiliate. So the Gemara answers it is a case where the ox intended to cause injury. If it was the action of a person, he would be liable for the humiliation he caused as well. As the master said, in a case where a person intended to cause injury, he is liable for humiliation, even if he did not intend to humiliate his victim. Hey, if I injure you and I intended to injure you, maybe I didn't intend to publicly humiliate you, but I did intend to cause you harm. I punched you in the face. I wanted to harm you. If that also causes humiliation, even though I didn't intend to humiliate you, too bad. I'm on the hook for your humiliation damages, as well as your direct damages and your medical costs and your loss of livelihood and everything else. So Rava said a different solution with regard to the difficulty that the Mishnah poses to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. The Mishnah is referring to a case where one lit a fire on Shabbos unintentionally. Although he is not liable to receive the death penalty, nevertheless, since he performed a prohibited action that would carry the death penalty if it were performed deliberately, he is still exempt from monetary restitution for the destruction that fire that he started unintentionally then goes and causes. So the Gemara explains, and this is in accordance with what the school of Chizkiah taught. As the school of Chizkiah taught, the verse states, "And he who kills an animal shall pay for it, and he who kills a man shall be put to death." Leviticus 24:21. And this verse indicates that one who kills a man and one who kills an animal are comparable before the law. And this teaches that just as with regard to one who kills an animal, the Torah did not differentiate between whether he does so unintentionally or whether he does so intentionally, whether advertently or inadvertently, whether by way of descent or by way of assent, and this was not to exempt him from paying monetary restitution in all these cases, but rather to render him liable to pay monetary restitution. As one who kills an animal is liable in any event, similarly, with regard to one who kills a man, do not differentiate between whether he does so intentionally or unintentionally, whether advertently or inadvertently, whether by way of descent or way of assent. And this was not to render him liable to pay monetary restitution for the damage he causes in the process of killing him, but rather to exempt him from paying monetary restitution in any event. It is derived from here that one who commits a transgression carrying the death penalty is exempt from paying damages for his action, even if he is not in practice given the death penalty. And the sages said to Rava, "Can you really interpret the Mishnah as referring to a case where the transgression was unintentional? But doesn't it teach that the transgressor is exempt because he is sentenced to death, which is only the case if the transgression was intentional?" And Rava answered that this is what the Mishnah is saying. He is exempt from paying damages, since when this action is performed intentionally, the transgressor is liable to be sentenced to death. And what are the circumstances in which one is liable to receive the death penalty for deliberately lighting a fire on Shabbos? It is a case where he needs the ashes. In other words, that stands in for any purpose that you might have that is a constructive purpose. I mean, if you want to light up the room, that's also going to qualify. Normally you're saying, well, he's just burning something down. It's destructive. But even that, it's not for the light that it gives, but rather he just wants to burn down that structure. And he's not going to build something in its place, but he needs the ashes. So burning it was a constructive action for him. So he did it on purpose, right? And it would definitely violate Shabbos because he needs the ashes. Therefore, even now, when the transgression was unintentional, he is exempt from paying damages. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 12. Here comes Mishnah number 13. With regard to an ox that was pursuing another ox, and the ox being pursued was injured, but there are no witnesses as to how it was injured. And this one, the owner of the injured ox says to the owner of the pursuing ox, "Your ox injured my ox, and you are liable to pay me damages." And that one, the owner of the pursuing ox, says in response, "No, rather, your ox was hurt by a rock, and I am not liable." Then, in this case, the burden of proof rests upon the claimant, which is the general rule in monetary damage cases under Torah law, that the one seeking to extract payment because he was damaged in some way and he wants restitution, wants to have damages paid to him, he has the burden of proof. The one seeking to extract money from the defendant has the burden of proof to show that he, in fact, is entitled to those damages. As long as the owner of the injured ox cannot prove that the injury was inflicted by the pursuing ox, the owner of the pursuing ox is not liable. Now, in a case where two oxen belonging to two different owners were pursuing one ox that belonged to a third person, and that ox was injured by one of the pursuing oxen. And this one, the owner of one of the pursuing oxen, says to the owner of the other, it was your ox that caused the injury. And that one, the owner of the other pursuing ox, says, no, it was your ox that caused the injury. Well, the two of them are exempt, since each of them rejects the claim of the injured party that his ox caused the injury. If both oxen belong to one person, then both are liable, as will be explained in the Gemara. In other words, the person with the injured ox, he knows that his ox was gored by one of two oxen, but he doesn't know which. And those two oxen are owned by different people. So, you might think, well, we don't know who did it, so those guys should split the value of the damages. But no, since we can't prove that either one is liable, both are exempt. Now, if the pursuing oxen belong to one person and were both innocuous, so that the restitution is paid exclusively from proceeds of the sale of the belligerent ox, and one was large and the other one was small. In this case, if the injured party says that the large ox caused the damage, and he is therefore entitled to receive restitution for half the damage from the value of the large ox, which let's say will cover what he's owed, whereas the value of the small ox won't. But the one liable for the damage says, no, rather it was my small ox that caused your damage. And half of its value is not sufficient to cover half the damage, or similarly in a case where one ox is innocuous and the other one is forewarned. And the injured party says it was the forewarned ox that caused the damage. And the injured party would therefore be eligible to receive full damages. But the one liable for the damage says, no, there were two oxen there, and it was my innocuous ox that caused the damage, in which case I'm only liable to pay for half of your damage. So in both of these above cases, the principle is that the burden of proof rests on the claimant, the one trying to extract money from the defendant. If the injured animals were two oxen, one large and the other one small, and the ones that caused the damage were also two oxen, one large and one small, and the injured party says, the large one injured the large ox, and the small one injured the small ox. And the one liable for damage says, no, rather the small one injured the large one. In which case, if half the value of the belligerent ox does not cover half the damage, he is not required to pay more. And the large one injured the small one, or similarly, if one of the belligerent oxen was innocuous and one of them was forewarned, and the injured party says it was the forewarned ox that injured my large ox, and the innocuous ox injured my small one, and the one liable for the damage says, no, rather, the innocuous ox injured the large one and the forewarned injured the small one, meaning he's going to have less damages to pay. In all these cases, the burden of proof rests upon the claimant, the one trying to extract payment for damages. That was Mishnah number 13. Now the Gemara. The Mishnah rules that in a case where there is uncertainty with regard to whether it was the pursuing ox that caused the injury to the other ox, the burden of proof rests on the claimant. So Rabbi Chia bar Abba says, that is to say, that the colleagues of Sumakos, who says that property of uncertain ownership is divided, will disagree with his opinion. Right? In other words, you might have said, well, since we're not sure which one's responsible, let's split the damages between the two guys who own oxen, one of whom definitely caused the damage, and we're just not sure which. So it seems like that's what Sumakos would say, that where you have property of uncertain ownership divided between, two claimants, we're going to split it. So here, this claim to damages that would be divided between the, two people who are on the hook. One of them is definitely on the hook, but we don't know which. So since it's uncertain which, we should divide it. That seems to be how Sumakos would handle it. But our Mishnah says, no, if we can't prove which of the oxen caused the damage, the two respective owners are exempt. No one pays, and the injured party is out of luck. Now, Rabbi Abba bar Memel said to Rabbi Chia bar Abba, does Sumakos, who says we divide in cases of uncertainty, does Sumakos state this principle even in the case of a certain claim and a certain claim, i.e. where both parties maintain the certainty of their claims, as appears to be in the case of the Mishnah? And Rabbi Chia bar Abba said to him, yes, Sumakos says this is even in a case where the claimants themselves, or in this case, the owners of the oxen, one of whom caused the damage, who each say, it was not my ox, it was not my ox. They are certain it was not their ox. Now we could say, how can you be so sure? But they say with certainty, no, it was not my ox. We are uncertain which ox caused the damage because there's two people who are claiming with certainty that it was not their ox. Right? So what Rabbi Abba Ramemel is saying to Rabbi Chia, are you saying that this sumakos principle, that we would divide, that this exists even where the claimants, or in this case the defendants, are speaking with certainty? No, I'm not on the hook. Wouldn't that more be the case where no one knows? No one knows, and no one is making a certain claim. They just say, we don't know. But yes, Rabbi Chia Bar Abba says, yes, Sumakos would say this even in a case where both defendants are claiming with certainty that they're not on the hook, or where both claimants are claiming with certainty that it is their money. And the Gemara asks, and from where is it inferred that the Mishnah is referring to a case of a certain claim and a certain claim? As it teaches that this one, the owner of the injured ox says, your ox injured my ox. And that one, the owner of the pursuing ox says, no, indicating that both make their claims with certainty. So Rav Papa objects this interpretation of the case from the suggestion that the case in the first clause of the Mishnah is one where there is a certain claim and a certain claim. It may be inferred that the latter clause, meaning the subsequent clause in the Mishnah, also is referring to a case where there are two certain claims made with certainty. So if so, say that the latter clause, if one was large and the other one small, and the injured party says that the large ox caused the damage, and the one liable for damage says, no, it was the small ox that caused the damage, or if one is innocuous and the other one is forewarned, and the injured party says it was the forewarned ox that caused the damage, but the one liable for damage says, no, it was my innocuous ox that caused the damage. In all these cases, the burden of proof rests upon the claimant. And this indicates that if he does not bring proof, he takes compensation according to what the one liable for damage says. If it is a case where both parties maintain certainty of their claims, let us say that this Mishnah is a conclusive refutation of the statement of Rabba Bar Nassan, who said that if one claims that another person owes him wheat, which he claims he deposited with him, right? I deposited my wheat with this guy to take care of it. Now I want it back. And the one who was, holding the wheat for me concedes that I deposited grain with him, but he says, you didn't give me wheat, you gave me barley, which is less expensive than wheat. So in this case, the one who is holding the grain is exempt from payment, since he did not admit to what was claimed, and what he did admit was not claimed. Similarly, here the injured party claims that it was the large ox that injured his ox, and the defendant claims that it was his small ox that caused the injury, but not the large ox. So his admission does not correspond to the claim. And yet he is apparently liable to pay according to his admission. This would be contrary to the ruling of Rabba Bar Nassan in that case of the guy holding somebody else's grain. So rather, this clause must be referring to a case where there is a certain claim and an uncertain claim, i.e. one party maintains certainty about his claim while the other party merely states his claim as a possibility. So the Gemara asks, who is the one who states a certain claim and who is the one who states an uncertain claim? If we say that it is the injured party who states with a certain claim that the large ox caused the injury, and it is the one liable for damage who states an uncertain claim that it was the small one, well, let us still say that the Mishnah is a conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rabba Bar Nassan, since the defendant does not admit to the claim of the injured party, and nevertheless he is liable to pay compensation from the smaller one. So rather, it must be the case where the injured party states with uncertainty that it was the large ox that caused the injury, and the one liable for damage states with certainty that it was his small ox that caused the damage. Since the claimant does not contradict the defendant's admission, the latter is liable to pay the amount that he admitted he owes. Now the Gemara notes, and from the fact that the latter clause of the Mishnah is referring to a case where the injured party states an uncertain claim and the one liable for damage states a certain claim, it may be inferred that the first clause is also referring to a case where the injured party states with uncertainty that it was the defendant's ox that injured his ox, and the one liable to pay damages states with certainty that it was injured by a stone. It is not referring to a case of two claims made with certainty. So the Gemara asks, and does Sumakos state his ruling that the disputed property is divided between the two parties, even with regard to this case where the claimant states an uncertain claim, so that it was necessary for the Mishnah to teach us that according to the other rabbis, it is not divided? Certainly Sumakos would concede that in this case, the burden of proof rests on the claimant. And the Gemara answers, no. Although the latter clause is referring to a case where the injured party states with uncertainty, and the one liable for damages states with certainty, the first clause is referring to a case where the injured party states with certainty and the one liable for damages states with uncertainty. And it is with regard to this case that the rabbis disagree with the opinion of Sumakos that the property is divided. So the Gemara questions this interpretation. But according to this interpretation, the first clause is not similar to the last clause. Why not explain the first clause as referring to a case of two claims made with certainty? And the sages said in response, a case of certainty, a case where certainty meets uncertainty and a case of uncertainty meets certainty are one matter. Therefore, the two clauses are congruent. By contrast, a case of certainty versus certainty and a case of uncertainty versus certainty, those are two different matters. Therefore, the first clause of the Mishnah cannot be referring to a case of two uncertain claims. So the Gemara returns to discuss the matter itself that was mentioned above. Rabba Bar Nassan says, if one claims that another owes him wheat and the other concedes that he owes him barley, so the latter is exempt from payment. And the Gemara asks, what novel element is this teaching us? We already learned it in a Mishnah. If one claims that another owes him wheat, and the other concedes that he owes him barley, the one who concedes that he owes barley is exempt, because what he concedes to is not what was claimed. So the Gemara answers, if it had been taught only from there in Tractate Shavuos, I would say the Mishnah means that he is exempt from payment of the value of the wheat, but liable to pay the value of the barley, which he concedes that he owes. Therefore, Rabba Bar Nassan teaches us that the Mishnah means that he is completely exempt, even from paying for the barley. And the Gemara raises an objection to this statement. We learned in the Mishnah here that if the injured animals were two oxen, one large and one small, and the ones that caused the damage were also two oxen, one large and one small, and the injured party claims that the large ox injured his large ox, and the small one injured his small ox, and the liable party claims, no, it was my small ox that injured your large ox, and my large ox injured your small one. So then the burden of proof rests upon the claimant. And this indicates that if the injured party does not bring proof for his claim, he takes compensation according to what the one liable for damage concedes. So according to Rabba Bar Nassan's statement, why does he receive compensation at all? The case is parallel to the case of wheat and barley, and the defendant should be entirely exempt. And the Gemara answers, the Mishnah does not indicate that the injured party receives compensation, rather that it is fitting for him to take compensation. But in practice, he does not receive any compensation. And the Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in a Baraisa that the injured party receives payment for his small ox from the liable party's large ox, and for his large ox from the liable party's small ox? So evidently he does receive payment. And the Gemara answers, the Baraisa is referring to a case where the injured party seized the defendant's ox, in which case the court allows it to remain in his possession, since his taking of it was appropriate, although the court cannot compel the defendant to pay him ab initio. So the Gemara raises an objection to Rabba Bar Nassan's statement from the last clause of the Mishnah. We learned in our Mishnah that if one of the belligerent oxen was innocuous and the other one was forewarned, and the injured party says it was the forewarned ox that injured the large one and the innocuous ox injured the small one, and the one liable for the damage says no, rather the innocuous ox injured the large one and the forewarned ox injured the small one. So in this case, the burden of proof rests upon the claimant. And And this indicates that if he does not bring proof for his claim, he takes compensation according to what the one liable for damage conceded. So why does he receive compensation at all? The case is parallel to the case of the wheat and the barley, and according to the view of Rabba Bar Nosson, he should get nothing. Now we're on page 36a, getting a little bit ahead, so we can finish the chapter. And the Gemara answers, the Mishnah does not indicate that the injured party receives compensation. Rather, it indicates that it is fitting for him to take compensation. But in practice, he does not receive any compensation. And the Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in Baraisa that he receives payment for his small ox from the liable party's forewarned ox and for his large ox from the liable party's innocuous ox? Evidently, he does receive payment. And the Gemara answers, the Baraisa is also referring to a case where the injured party seized the defendant's ox, in which case the court allows it to remain in his possession, but the court cannot compel the defendant to pay him ab initio, which seems to be an odd outcome because it would seem to be sort of encouraging taking the law into your own hands. New subject. The Mishnah teaches in a case where an ox was injured by one of two oxen that were pursuing it. If both oxen belong to one person, both are liable. And Rav of Parzika said to Rav Ashi, should one learn from the fact that both are liable? That in a case of innocuous oxen that cause damage, if the injured party wishes, he can collect damages from the proceeds from the sale of this ox, and if he wishes, from the sale of that ox? And Rav Ashi rejected this inference. With what are we dealing here? We are dealing with a forewarned ox. With forewarned oxen. Both of them were habitual gorers. In which case the injured party does not collect damages exclusively from the belligerent ox, but rather from any of the owner's property. Therefore, he can collect from either ox as compensation. Rav of Parzika replied, if the Mishnah is referring to forewarned oxen, say the latter clause of the Mishnah. If one of the belligerent oxen was large and the other one was small, and the injured party says that the large ox caused the damage, but the one liable for damage says, no, the small ox caused the damage. So the burden of proof rests upon the claimant. If this is referring to forewarned oxen, what difference does it make to him which one caused the injury? Ultimately, the liable party is required to pay the value of a full ox in any case. And Rav Ashi said to him, the latter clause of the Mishnah is referring to innocuous oxen, and the first clause is referring to forewarned oxen. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in. Rav Acha the elder said to Rav Ashi, if it is referring to a case of forewarned oxen, where compensation is not collected specifically from the belligerent ox, but from any property of the owner, why does the Mishnah state they are liable in the plural form? It should have stated the man is liable. And furthermore, what is the word both in the statement? What is both, when it says both are liable, what is this referring to? Rather, the first clause of the Mishnah is actually referring to innocuous oxen, and it is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who says that the injured party and the liable party are partners, as they share ownership of the belligerent ox. And therefore, the reason that the owner of the belligerent oxen is liable is that the two of them are available. So he cannot dismiss the injured party by claiming that this ox is not the one that caused the injury. But if the two of them are not available, for example, if one died or was lost, he can say to the injured party, go bring proof that it was this ox that caused you damage, and I will pay you compensation. So overall, the principle is the burden of proof is on the claimant who wants to extract money. That even though, sometimes a person is hurt, and that's unfortunate, it's not that he's always going to receive damages if the type of damage he sustained and the situation he sustained it doesn't fall within the categories of law where damages are paid. However, most cases will fall with that. These are, quite exceptional and unusual cases. Okay, it looks like I've only got one question on Bava Kamma 35 from Joseph. When I was growing up, I helped my father in his insurance business learning how to write claims using the Blue Book values for cars. Was there a standard going price, or how did the sages value things and know what to pay for these damages, right? Because we've said several times that, when somebody becomes liable to pay damages, It's because the injured party, went to court, proved his case, and then there was an appraisal, right? So there was an appraisal. So what was the basis of that appraisal? Presumably, there was some kind of expert, right? Like they didn't have the blue book, but there was the guy who was the blue book guy, right? So they would bring some kind of expert witness that would say, this is what this is worth in the market. To replace that ox, it's going to cost such and such. Or if that ox had not been gored and you went to sell it on the market, it would have been worth such and such. That's actually more accurate than replacement value. And that's what the damages are based on. So I think my simple answer to you is they bring in an expert. But I'm guessing. Sharon, last question. Wasn't there a way to gather evidence rather than only relying on verbal statements of the parties involved? I think what they're saying is, if there are witnesses, we will listen to them. Often there weren't witnesses. So I think a good question is, well, what about, footprint evidence? And what about, some expert who comes in and testifies, well, the kind of wound that was in that ox's side is a result of a goring and not of falling on a rock. So I would think that kind of testimony would have to be part of the case. And, they didn't have the same kinds of rules of evidence that we have. I don't think they were any less sophisticated. But they did have rules of evidence. There wasn't, hearsay is not accepted. That's actually in Torah law as well, except for certain kinds of hearsay, right? So in terms of that kind of expert testimony, physical evidence, I don't know what the rules are, certainly not offhand. But I think we will learn more about that as we move forward, both in these tractates, the Bavas, right? Bava Kamma, Bava Mitzia, Bava Basra, and also when we get to court cases in Makos and Sanhedrin. That's what I've got for us tonight. Happy Hanukkah to everybody. May we light up the darkness around the world. May we feel safe enough to light our Hanukkah menorahs in the window or in front of the house, even in this time of rising danger, rising anti-Semitism. Just before the show started tonight, I heard that there was a shooting outside a synagogue in Albany, and I believe no one was hurt, thank God, and they caught the guy. It's a time of rising danger. So please, everybody, be vigilant, have situational awareness, but also, if you're Jewish, be a proud Jew. And if you're not Jewish and you're an ally of the Jewish people, thank you so much. And may we all be blessed with safety and peace and freedom. Please, God, we say amen.